All right, let's get into it. We're going to break down one of the most audacious, most legendary heists in all of history. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds completely impossible, right? But believe it or not, on a dark night back in 1963, that's exactly what happened. This simple little trick, it kicked off what would become known as the crime of the century. So let's set the scene. It's the middle of the night, August 8th, 1963. We're on the Royal Mail train, chugging along from Glasgow to London. And that's when the driver, a man named Jack Mills, sees something that just shouldn't be there. Out in the middle of nowhere, in the pitch black, there's this red signal. So Mills does what any driver would do. He brings the whole train to a screeching halt. And just like that, everything goes quiet. A really tense silence. What he doesn't know, of course, is that he's just driven straight into a perfectly laid trap. Okay, so what's so fascinating about this, and really what makes this robbery so legendary, is how they even got to this point. I mean, this wasn't some random smash and grab. Oh no, this was the result of months and months of incredibly careful planning. So the whole operation was the brainchild of this guy, Bruce Reynolds. He was a notorious criminal, kind of saw himself as this suave, gentleman thief. And get this, he actually managed to unite two rival gangs from London for this one job. The one big rule? No guns, absolutely no firearms. This little detail is part of why the robbery became almost mythical later on. And the whole thing started with a secret tip from an insider at the Royal Mail. Right, so that HVP carriage, that was the big prize. And this insider, whoever they were, gave the gang two absolutely critical pieces of information. Without these tips, the heist probably never would have happened. Okay, so tip number one was all about a massive security loophole. You see, the usual HVP carriages, the ones with the brand new alarm systems, well, on this particular day, they were out of service. And instead, they were using this old reserve carriage, M3024M. The crucial part, it had absolutely no alarm system. I mean, talk about a stroke of luck for the gang. Or, just really, really good inside information. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. The second tip? Well, that was about the money itself. Turns out, the amount of cash on that train was way, way bigger than usual. So, why was there so much cash? It was all because of a recent bank holiday. The carriage wasn't just carrying the normal amount, it was carrying 10 times the normal amount. We're talking about a once-in-a-decade kind of opportunity just sitting there on the tracks. So, you've got the perfect target, a jackpot payday just waiting. The stage is totally set. Now, let's get into the heist itself and see how this all went down in a crazy, high-stakes, real-time operation. The second that train stopped, boom, the clock was ticking. This gang moved with what you can only describe as military precision. Everything was timed down to the second. But, even the best plans have problems. And their almost perfect plan hit a major snag. The retired driver they brought along to, drive the train for them, he was completely baffled by the modern controls. So, in this moment of pure chaos, they have to think on their feet. They actually revive the injured driver, Jack Mills, and force him to drive his own train to their ambush point at Bridego Bridge. Can you even imagine that? So they've got the money, we're talking 2.5 tons of it, and they've just vanished into the night. It seriously looks like they've pulled off the perfect crime. But as they were leaving, one of the robbers made one single tiny mistake. A mistake that would end up costing them everything. So picture this. The terrified male staff are all tied up on the floor. As the robbers are leaving, one of them turns back and gives them this warning. Now, what that robber had no way of knowing was that this casual threat, this little off-the-cuff remark, was the first huge clue for the police. It basically told them, hey, our hideout is within a 30-minute drive. It gave them an exact search radius, narrowing down the manhunt in a massive way. So the gang gets away clean, they make it to their hideout, a place called Leatherslade Farm. And what's the first thing they do? They start celebrating by playing a game of Monopoly with some of the stolen cash. But then they turn on the radio and hear about that 50-kilometer police search, and they panic. This panic sets off a whole chain reaction of mistakes. They flee the farm early, they pay some guy to burn it down, but the guy just takes the money and runs without ever lighting the fire, and then a neighbor, seeing all this weird activity, calls the police. It was just one mistake after another, and it left their hideout perfectly preserved for investigators to find. So when the police show up, it's like Christmas morning for a detective.
They find empty mailbags, the getaway truck, but the real breakthrough, the smoking gun, came from the one thing they forgot to clean up: fingerprints, all over that Monopoly game board.
And here's the kicker. These weren't criminal masterminds who'd never been caught before. They all had existing criminal records. So the police just had to run the prints, get a match, and just like that, the perfect crime completely fell apart. They were able to track down and arrest most of the gang pretty quickly. The trial, as you can imagine, was an absolute media circus. These guys became household names overnight. But beyond the flashy headlines, the real consequences for everyone involved were absolutely life-altering. This robbery wasn't just a crime. It became a part of British folklore. Yeah, the public was totally fascinated by how bold the crime was, but the human cost was incredibly high. Most of the gang got slapped with 30-year sentences, and the train driver Jack Mills, he was never the same after the attack. He couldn't work again and sadly died just 7 years later. And there were still 2 key people involved in the whole plot that were never, ever identified. And that right there leaves us with the biggest, most haunting question of all, the real ghost in this whole story. Who was the Royal Mail insider? Who was this anonymous source who fed them the information, the person who made the crime of the century even possible? They were never caught. They just vanished, making sure that the Great Train Robbery would always remain one of history's most fascinating and unsolved mysteries.